Hey everyone, welcome to Chapter 12 Treatment Groups. I am so nervous about including a song after what I have gone through. I don't know if I can sing you a song about treatment. If I could, okay, this is what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you to go listen to Coldplay Fix You. That's my treatment song. So go do that. I'm not gonna keep going until you go do that. I really meant it. No, I'm just teasing. It is a great song though. So this is where we're at. Again, you're starting to see how all the pieces are coming together and how, in many ways, the generalist model for social work applies to the generalist model for doing groups. And we see that there's so many things in common, but specifically in treatment groups, there's a certain level of expertise that's usually required because we're talking about more complex issues, and we're talking about groups that have a definite therapeutic component. So lots of times if we're doing a treatment group, we need to have extensive kind of preparation, planning, so we know what each new group is going to look like and sort of the purpose for each time together. You have to actually understand the literature and the issues that come up. Now, I just want to pause and say one thing around that. It's okay if you don't know. Nobody can know everything. So, if you get asked a question in group you don't know the answer, or actually just in life, but certainly as a social worker, it's okay to say, that's an excellent question. And I want to find out the answer because I'm not sure. And so sometimes it's like, let's find out together, or can I get back to you next week, or let's talk to somebody who might know. So it's okay that you don't know everything. Um, and it's much better that you actually admit that you don't know than try to sort of BS your way through. Um, because you could actually inadvertently do some damage that way. So, again, the same as the other goal groups, you want to have a purpose and goals. You want to be able to anticipate what people need and sort of set some expectations. And Zastrow talks about visualization and sort of using visualization to kind of help you prep for sessions. And again, this is again about relaxing before starting a session. And I think that, kind of like Zastrow says, some anxiety can be good. A little bit of like nervousness shows that you're excited and you're invested, and that's okay. That's a normal part of the process. But of course, if we're paralyzed with fear, then we need to really start to look at some strategies to help ourselves. So obviously, if you're running a group, it's best to be on time or even early, and to look at, what are some things that people need. For instance, if you're doing a grief group, you better have lots of Kleenexes available, and good ones, not crummy, cheap Kleenexes, good ones. And anything that can become emotionally charged, I would highly recommend that you have something for people to drink, preferably water, although lots of times you would also have tea or coffee as well. And the reason why you would have water is that when people experience a shot of cortisol, which is like a stress response system kicking in, lots of times one of the easiest ways to kind of calm and to lower your cortisol levels is simply to drink water. So that's a lovely little tip that you can tell people. And that is why it's also helpful to have water available for people to drink. So you want to anticipate some of these things. If you have a group for little kids, you always want to have a snack. If you're working with little kids, you always want to make sure that snack is peanut free. And increasingly, you'd want to be mindful around different diets. So those kind of things. We want to be able to observe the mood and obtain information regarding the interests of the group as well. So when we're looking at arranging the room, again, some of this is repetition, but having a circle can have more cohesion, and because there's no one sitting at the head of the table. The perception is that we're all in this together and we're all equal. One of the reasons why the classrooms at the college are a big challenge for me, and I know for many other instructors, as they're sort of this old school model of that, one person stands at the front and is the giver of knowledge, and everybody else just sits there and receives it, which is not very conducive to a more interactive and collaborative way of learning. So you want to make sure that you introduce yourself. I'm going to talk a little bit about leader introduction and Zastrow's thing about credentials. I remember in my training, it was talked about quite extensively that, we should, have copies of our credentials on the wall and have them up, and we should make sure that everybody is aware that we have knowledge and it's valid, sort of like the idea that we are experts in our field, and this is sort of the evidence to support that. I've always kind of felt a little uncomfortable with that, and I think it has to do with the model of practice that I use, which I've talked about before, is a feminist model and relies heavily on anti-oppression practices, and also is really about trying to lower the power differential between myself and my client. And to me, those papers can become intimidating for people. And so for me, that's not necessarily part of my model of practice. So certainly I want people to know that I'm not just, Joe Blow off the street, and I actually do kind of know what I'm talking about. But for me, that's not part of how I really emphasize, what we're going to be doing together. But anyway, icebreakers. Gee, I wonder if I think they're important. There's no reason why we're doing them every single class. So yeah, great way to introduce group members. And really, this is important when you develop your group format, because you have been learning all along about how to use an icebreaker to build cohesion and community and have fun and get to know each other a little bit. It's good to have members state their expectations of the group during a first group session, and often we start with factual information just to dispel any concerns and myths that are happening. We need to be clear about what our roles are, what our responsibilities are. We need to present as being knowledgeable about the topic, and being able to talk about the topic. And even in treatment groups, we can kind of make a decision around how much we want to share leadership. Sometimes we take a little bit more of a hands-on role at the beginning of the group, but as the group develops, we then might decide to kind of take a little bit of a different role. Building rapport is so important in all groups, but really, really fundamental in treatment groups. So if I'm going to a driver's education group, which is an education group, does it matter that I really feel bonded and connected with Carl, who's 4 seats over? Probably not that much. But if I'm here to talk in a treatment group about something that is raw and real and authentic and vulnerable and requires a great deal of emotional risk on my behalf, I better feel like Carl's a pretty stand-up guy, because if not, I might really struggle to, have that therapeutic experience. So the other thing that happens when we build rapport is that we can use the relationships, which I'll talk about a little bit in my next PowerPoint, but we can use those relationships as therapeutic tools. And often things that would really upset us, maybe we can tolerate a little bit more, so we have a greater distress tolerance because of the connection to the people in the group. So those are all different elements. But also Zastrow just talks about Things like shared vocabulary, obviously confidentiality. So these are all important things around building rapport. One of the ones here I want to talk about is to try to be genuine and calm and not express shock. So lots of times people have significant amounts of shame attached to whatever it is that they're seeking treatment for. And shame, according to Brene Brown, is the difference between I have done something wrong, or I have sort of the behavior component, versus I am as a human being unworthy, right? So a little, just good to kind of explain with like a little kid, whereas like if a little kid dumps the garbage over, they might say to themselves, there could be an element of, I feel guilt because I did this, and that is okay. Guilt is fine. Guilt is a normal human emotion. Guilt actually means that you're not a sociopath, so we want a little bit of guilt. But if the child dumped the garbage over and feels like I am not worthy now of receiving love, I am flooded with that I am not worthy, that I am garbage myself, that is shame. That is big time shame. And so when people over identify with their behavior sometimes, or with what has happened to them, that can be incredibly powerful. And so when people have that level of shame and they take a risk in a group, it's important that the group not then go, oh my word, I can't believe that. That's the craziest stuff I've ever heard, right? Because here someone's taking a big risk and they already have all this shame talk. So internally, so it's important that we try very hard to be neutral and accepting when somebody tells us something, which may be a little bit surprising to us or jarring to us. So, that being said, I'm just going to say one more thing about that. When you think that you've heard it all, there was something else will always come up that you go, that is new to me. So you are a human being, and that's okay. So I just wanted to say that. This is one of the trickiest parts of running a treatment group. It is the balance of when do we explore problems in depth, what that looks like. So what is the extent of the problem? How long has the problem existed? What are the root causes? How does the person sort of perceive the issue? What is the impact on their life? What's their coping? What are the strengths that they have? And it can be challenging in a number of ways. So these are all the things that we would explore in therapeutic groups, especially treatment-focused therapeutic groups. And it's sort of a delicate dance to decide the timing of when are people ready, and then also how much do you let Carl, I don't know why I'm picking on Carl, but that's in my head. How much do we let Carl go? Because I can also see that Juan really needs to talk right now. So how deep do I let Carl go before I sort of move Carl away to focus on Juan? And these are the challenges that take place in a group, and it can be really tricky. So actually, this brings one of my favorite approaches to groups is to allow Carl the time. So have you thought about the ways that you might resolve this? But sometimes if I'm wanting to invite other people from the group, I might say, has anybody else ever experienced this? And do they have some ideas that they could share with Carl that he might be able to utilize? And I can make it open like that, or I could say, Juan, you look like you've had something that you've wanted to say. I noticed that, you've sort of tried several times to kind of say something. Is there something that in your life has worked for you that you think might be useful for Carl? So I can direct it to one person, I can open it up to the group. And for me, one of the beautiful things about groups is that actually the onus is not on me as the facilitator to have all the answers. The onus on me is to make sure that I'm facilitating full participation of people and trying to get everybody contributing in a way that means that we get a much fuller and richer experience. So I just think that's actually one of the most beautiful things that can happen in groups. Um, so this slide, when you're looking at alternative solutions, some of this is going to look very much like the problem-solving process in social work, right? Sometimes we look at sort of pros and cons. We might get the group to suggest alternatives. We might kind of come in with, well, I've had clients in the past who've tried this. You know, what are the positives and the negatives of that? And then the piece around self-determination. What does the client want to choose? So we might, you know, Carl might say, you know what, that's a great idea, Juan. Next week, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and I'll come back and let the group know how it works. And one of the things that we might do is also then offer for a chance for Carl to practice. So we might say, okay, so next week you're going to confront your mom about when your dad left and she wasn't honest with you. Just winging a scenario here. And Juan had said that in the past when he used an I statement, that was really, really helpful, and he got some understanding with somebody in his life. So we would like to offer you an opportunity to do a role play, Carl. So, you know, here Wanda is going to be your mom. And first of all, I'll play Carl and I'll explain what it could look like, and then we'll let Carl try. And so then other people that might say, is there anybody else in the group who would like to practice using an I statement for next week in terms of having a tough conversation with somebody in their life? And so you see how we then can open it up to the group again. Actually, as I'm telling my fake story, I'm getting really excited. Because I'm thinking about times when I've been in groups and I've seen that synergy and that energy happen, and it's quite amazing. So just a reminder that it's important that we kind of keep in mind what stage is the group in. And this was, remember, if you recall, the Garland, Jones, and Kolodny model, but there's other models as well. So go back and look at what those other models are. But, you know, what stage is group development in? Because at the very first session, we may not, you know, we're in experience pre-affiliation. The group is just getting to get to know each other. We're not going to necessarily disclose our deepest, darkest, you know, most intimate things that have happened because we're not even, you know, it's inappropriate. It's inappropriate at that time. We don't know each other. We don't trust each other. And it's going to be much later in the group at the intimacy stages where we're maybe starting to share those things. So have a look at the theory and sort of see, how does this fit and how does this apply? And think about it even in terms of your classes. Where were you at the beginning of the semester? Where were you at the very beginning of your program? Is that different in the larger classroom setting than it is in the smaller group settings? Is that different with your working groups that you're working on assignments for? Because maybe there's a different level of intimacy in those groups. You know, think about how you can apply these models so that they make sense and that they maybe can shed some light. Ending a session. So we need to plan for endings. I always try very hard to have warnings, especially for anybody who's been in a group that is emotionally intense. You want to do your best to sort of provide a safe container for people to have expression of emotion, which means that there are sort of limits and sort of like wrapping your arms around people. So letting them know, you know, we have about 15 minutes left. So, you know, that we're going to spend that time summarizing what's happened, and we're going to, you know, everybody can have their Kleenex. So you're not ripping off some raw thing and then, okay, now group is over, and then leaving somebody to leave group like that, right? So we want to try to control the the emotion in the room and utilize the skills we have as facilitators and to sort of manage what that looks like so that we hold space for people in a way that's respectful, and also they have warnings. And this is so particularly important when you have a group that people have experienced trauma. But and the one I'm going to mention, the obvious one, would be grief and loss, because when people have experienced grief and loss, especially traumatic grief and loss, they have not had a chance to learn sometimes how to cope with healthy terminations. And that means big terminations like a loss, a traumatic loss, but also when sessions end, when people say goodbye, so we want to kind of practice. It's a little bit like a muscle that you want to be practicing that skill in little safe ways so that you can sort of acquire the skill for when you need it in big times. So yeah, you might do a summary of what happened. You might kind of clarify what actions need to be taken. This is the homework everybody's going to do. You might want to end with a relaxation exercise, especially if you've had a very emotionally intense session. And you want to make sure you leave enough time. The minute I figure out how to do that, I will. I'm chronically late in sessions. They always run over. I'm chronically over in class, which you've already probably figured out, seeing as I've provided PowerPoints ahead of time and we still quite often use all our time. So that's a tough one for me, but goals. And this is just sort of what I was saying, that sometimes we have loss and guilt or disappointment. All those things can come up, especially when we're coming to the end of the group itself, not just the session, but the whole group is over. You can use that time to also solicit feedback for what can you do to improve for future groups. Just some other kind of factors to kind of keep in mind when we're talking about treatment groups. Co-facilitating groups can be amazing. So the most complex groups I've ever done, I'm just trying to think if I've not. I almost always co-facilitate groups, and I highly recommend that because two people can hold space for the group in a way that is, just so much more effective. And also, if anybody requires individual support, if you have two people in the group, one of you can step out and support that person. So yeah, usually the groups I have done in co-facilitation. I have mostly had very positive experiences of co-facilitating, but I have certainly had a couple that have not been great. You have to develop a rapport and a good communication with whoever you're co-facilitating with. The important things around legal safeguards, making sure you are qualified with a diploma. You probably should not be doing any therapeutic groups, treatment kind of focus groups on your own for sure. If you are with somebody who's qualified, I think that is probably way more appropriate to be like a sort of group helper. We want to set boundaries with clients. We've talked about all those things that we talked about in Social Work 100. It can be really hard when clients have disclosed really personal and pertinent and beautiful and touching things, and you've been moved, not just as a social worker, but as a person. And then at the end of the group, the client is like, I'd love to get coffee with you sometime, so you have to be able to manage those professional boundaries. And that is all for treatment groups. And I will kind of talk about treatment groups in another PowerPoint, but with a specific, I'm going to talk about YALAM coming up. So stay tuned for YALAM.